Hi, my name is Emily Klesitz, and this is my academic poster all about lack of student motivation in the classroom. So, understanding how motivation affects academic achievement is an important topic in education. Many previous studies discuss how teacher beliefs, classroom environments, and positive relationships affect student motivation. Findings have shown that motivation is not just an individual trait, but also something that is affected by teachers and peers. So, we're going to start with the purpose of my study. So, the purpose of this study is to examine the connection between motivation in the classroom and academic performance. So, the question is, do different levels of motivation affect how students perform in the classroom? So that is one part of the purpose. Also, this study will look at the types of motivation that have the biggest influence on academic achievement. Excuse me. So there are two types of motivation. There's intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is the desire to complete an activity for a person's own personal reward, like enjoyment, satisfaction, or even just personal growth. Extrinsic motivation is driven by external factors like praise, money, or rewards. So, this study will seek to figure out if one type of motivation has a greater influence on academic success than the other one. And then finally, this study will also provide ways educators can influence and increase student motivation in the classroom, which would ultimately lead to improved learning outcomes. So, the research question for my study is, how does student motivation in the classroom affect academic achievement? So, this is a problem in education for many reasons. So, first, unmotivated students may fall behind academically, which would ultimately lead to achievement gaps. Now, when there are gaps in education, they become harder to close as students get older because the gaps just get bigger and bigger. So, we don't want those achievement and those gaps to happen. Also, low motivation can lead to classroom management issues. When students are not motivated in the classroom and they're not working hard and they don't really care to do well, there will be more off-task behavior, lower participation, and more disruptions, which would lead to interrupted learning. And we don't want that. And then finally, a lack of motivation can have long-term consequences. There can be lower graduation rates, more dropouts, and limited career options for students, um, limited options for post secondary education. Um, they won't be able to get into college. So those long-term consequences are what we do not want. So let's talk about the methodology that will be used in this study. So for this study, a mixed methods approach will be used. So the qualitative data would come from teacher interviews and student questionnaires. This would be a smaller group of participants. Now, the quantitative data, that would include tools that could measure academic achievement, like grades, standardized tests, that kind of thing. Also, the quantitative data would include surveys using Likert scale questions, a 1 to 5 scale. So the questions could include items like, I enjoy learning new things in class, or I try hard even when the work is difficult. Okay, so the data would include both qualitative and quantitative. Now I'm going to talk about the expected findings from this study. So, some important findings will emerge from the research. So, there are 4 ways that educators can work to improve motivation in the classroom. So, the first is through teacher influence. In a 2020 study, Bostrom et al. States that teachers play a crucial role for study motivation, particularly in how they convey expectations to students and organize classroom activities. So teachers can influence motivation through making lessons interesting, giving meaningful feedback, and recognizing effort and progress. So, all of those things, if the teacher does those, all of those things will encourage students to work hard, which will in turn cause more academic success. The next finding is relationships with students. So, in a 2018 study, Daniels et al. Highlights the fact that caring relationships were viewed as an essential foundation for being responsible for student motivation. So, students need to feel like their teacher cares about them, respects them, and believes in their abilities. So, when teachers do this, students will feel more confident and motivated to do well. And in turn, they'll work harder and achieve more success. The third finding is creating a positive classroom environment. So, in a 2021 study, Killick et al. Says that it has been revealed that one of the learning and teaching factors that motivates students is the positive classroom culture. So, a positive classroom environment helps students feel safe, valued, and respected. So, this includes having clear expectations, giving a lot of encouragement, showing kindness, and having mutual respect. And when students feel safe in their classroom environment, they are more willing to work hard. So, finally, the fourth finding is about design-based learning. So, design-based learning gives students hands-on, creative, and meaningful learning experiences. So, in a 2018 study, von Kulikson et al. Says that design-based learning and makerspace programs have been shown to be effective in increasing student motivation for STEM learning. So, this process encourages active learning, critical thinking, and collaboration. So, all of these things will help increase student motivation in the classroom, which then leads to academic success because design-based learning is all about tapping into their interests. They're excited to learn because it's hands-on, it's creative, it's interesting. And when students feel that, they'll be more motivated in the classroom and they'll be more willing to learn and work hard. So, the analysis of the research would be best to be more thematic in nature from both the students and the teachers' perspectives. So, by using a thematic analysis, the researcher would be able to see the why and the how of the patterns that emerge in the data. So then, by comparing the responses from the student questionnaires with measurable academic data, the researchers could then figure out whether students with a higher level of motivation in the classroom have higher academic achievement. So they can triangulate the results from the quantitative and the qualitative data to see if there's a correlation there. Next, we have ethical considerations. So, when interpreting the research findings, researchers need to make sure that they are following ethical guidelines. This is very important in a research study. So, all participants will provide informed consent. They have to consent to be a part of the study, and they need to be fully aware of all of the aspects of the research project, the research process, everything that goes into this process. Again, also, all participants will remain anonymous, and all data will be stored securely with passwords. We don't want any kind of data breach so that these participants' information gets out. All interviews will be video recorded and a transcript will be included to make sure that everything is accurate. And then finally, accommodations will be provided for all participants who need them. Now, there are some limitations to this study. So some of the limitations of the study could include time constraints, researcher influence, resource limitations, and complexity of motivation. So a short-term study might miss how motivation and achievement interact over time. A study like this really needs to be done over an entire school year because the researcher needs to see how the motivations affect academic achievement over a longer period of time. So there might be some time constraints for the researcher when it comes to that. When it comes to researcher influence, the researcher could be biased in the analysis of the data, or students and teachers might report what they think the researcher wants to hear. Also, a study like this requires a lot of time, staff, and funding, which might not be available. So there are some resource limitations when it comes to this study. And finally, motivation is very multidimensional. There's a lot of aspects of motivation that goes into this, and a single survey or instrument might not fully capture all aspects of student motivation. So there might need to be a bigger study that is completed. But that is the information about my research study. These are the references that I have used, and thank you so much for your time.